Okay, welcome to the PPM Attorney Capital Forum. I'm your host, Darren Mangum, securities lawyer. I'll make sure I've got, I think everything's running, so we might as well get started. Getting started a little late today, but thank you for joining us. Today we're talking about different alternative forms of securities. When it comes to, the last few sessions we've talked about, we've talked about equity securities, common stock, LLC interests, limited partnership interests, that kind of thing. In the last session, I believe we talked about debt securities, promissory notes, debentures. Different kinds of debt securities. Today we're talking about alternative securities. I'm going to lump these together. Investment contracts are an example of those. Tokenized assets have been really active lately in the news. We've been very active. Let me pull up the today's outline, making sure so we're on the same page. Yeah, we're talking about tokens and also special purpose entities, alternative securities. These are not your traditional securities that you would typically see, like either offered on a stock exchange or through a broker. Although, when we talk about the alternative securities markets, equities securities are offered all the time typically in the form of limited partnership interests and things of this nature. But when we're talking about, mainly we're talking about like investment contracts. These are, if it's not debt and if it's not equity, it could certainly be a hybrid of the two, right? You could certainly have, for example, you could have a debt instrument, a debt security with an equity kicker, right? I mean that's a hybrid, right? Where, hey, we're going to pay your money back, but then also you're getting an equity interest as well, right? That would be an example of a hybrid type deal. But most of these are governed by investment contracts. What is an investment contract, right? It really goes back to an investment contract is any sort of investment in an enterprise where the investor is relying upon the efforts of a third party to generate profits. Okay. And the relationship is not equity, it's not debt, but there's a contract that basically spells out, hey, this is I'm as the investor, I'm gonna give you money, and you're gonna give me a return on that investment based upon some aspect of the commercial enterprise, right? So the investor is expecting to get a return on their investment, right? And it's all governed by an investment contract. An investment contract typically does not involve any kind of equity interest, although you could certainly have it convertible to equity, or you could certainly add an equity kicker in there. But usually an investment contract is dealing with, it's a specific contract designed to fit the intention of the parties, because not always is an equity interest a good fit. Not always does the company or the client want to give up an equity interest, nor does the investor maybe want an equity interest. And also, it's not necessarily debt either, right? It's basically, hey, we're going to spell out some terms, and we're going to write up an investment contract that spells out, how am I going to get paid back, and under what circumstances and when and how much, right? That's basically it's going to be governed by an investment contract. And it all arises out of the famous Howey test, which was involved a Supreme Court case involved back in the around 1930s, 1940s actually. It was after the Securities Act was passed, and a farm grower, Howey, he wanted investors to invest into his orchard, right? He was growing fruit. I believe it was an orange grove in Florida, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a while since I've read the case, but the facts of the case were that he got a bunch of investors that said, "Hey, look, you're going to give me money. You're not going to own any interest in the orchard, in the underlying entity that owned the orchard. You're not going to own any of the business, but basically, hey, you can invest in, you can give me money and I'll invest it in. I'm going to give you maybe an interest in this particular tree, for example, right? And whatever profits are generated on this tree, you'll get a piece of that, right? And so it's certainly commonly used. Nowadays, it's commonly used in the form of like, hey, maybe you have a purchase order, right? That you're saying to the investor. This is an example, right? You're saying, hey, investor, you're going to give me money, and we're going to use that money to fund this purchase order. And then when we sell these widgets or these products from this purchase order, you're going to receive 50, we're going to split it 50-50, any kind of profits generated from this particular purchase order, right? Or this particular asset, right? Oftentimes they're used when we have example of a client who he was opening up some different, he was opening up a cannabis shop, right? And really this could be applicable to any kind of shop, but this client happened to be opening up a cannabis shop, and the cannabis shop, he wanted the investor to invest in this particular cannabis shop. He didn't want the investor to have an ownership interest in his overall business, and it's very location specific, right? This particular cannabis shop was in a high trafficked area, and it was going to be kind of the flagship store, and there was also a right of first refusal to invest in other cannabis shops as they opened, but he was going to have a profits interest, and that's the way the contract was written up. They were going to get a profits interest in this particular shop, right? Whatever this particular shop generated in form of cash flow, the investor was going to get a share of that up until a certain point. I think it was like for a 5-year term. Whatever the shop is going to generate after 5 years, you're going to get. I think it was kind of staged too, right? It was, if you invest so much money, if you invest $100,000, you're going to get, 10%. I think I don't have the particular terms in front of me, but it was like, if you invest, you'll get 20% of the profits, right? If you invest $50,000 or $500,000. You're going to get half the profits, right? If you invest $1 million, I think that was the maximum. I think that was $500,000 up to, you'll get half the profits, right? Because all he needed was around $500,000 per store to open them, right? And so that was the structure of the contract. It was very, very well written out. We did the PPM, full disclosure of the risks of the enterprise and all of that. And then he went and sold these securities to his clients or to his investors, right? And each investor owned an interest in a different store, right? So another investor may be investing in a totally different store, and maybe that particular store, may not be as good a location, and maybe it has different deal terms on that particular store, right? So anyway, that's an example of how investment contracts could be put into play, and the reason why, Yeah, so that's an example of a couple examples of investment contracts. As far as when it comes to tokens, that obviously is a very, very hot topic right now, based on the SEC's obviously position in the fact that they believe all tokens, any kind of tokenized asset, token securities are considered securities, which really kind of makes sense when you look at what is an investment contract, going back to it's an investment in a commercial enterprise where the profits, the investor is relying upon the efforts of the promoter, of the owner of the company, or the promoter of the company to generate profits, right? And so when it comes to cryptocurrencies, any kind of tokenized asset, we've done like a lot of different cryptocurrency, different kinds of tokenized asset type offerings, and usually the instruments themselves, the tokens, a lot of times the tokens don't actually exist yet, or the actual contract where the investor is purchasing the tokens. Obviously, it's not equity, it's not debt. They're investing in an investment contract for the delivery of tokens, and usually that's the instrument that's used is called a simple agreement for future tokens, called a SAFE, right? Actually, a SAFT. There is and we can talk about safes when it comes to like special purpose entities. I should have thrown safes on the outline here, but a safe is an example of an investment contract that doesn't give the investor equity now, but it's basically a simple agreement for the delivery of future equity based on some terms, right? And usually it's based upon future valuation, or it's based upon hitting certain milestones, different things like that, where there's the delivery of the equity is in the future, and it's contingent upon certain things, right? An example of that is like, hey, if you hit $1 million in sales, we're going to be delivering, we're going to get so much equity in the future, or usually it's based on a future valuation, and that way the investor and the company don't have to negotiate the valuation of the company now. They can kick the can down the road and say, hey, look, neither one of us can agree upon what the value of the current company, the current value of the company is. But what we can do is say, hey, based upon some objective criteria in the future, this would be a fair equity interest in the company, and that way nobody can complain about it, right? And so tokens, when it comes to tokens, the simple, like kind of like a SAFE, a SAFT, or a simple agreement for future tokens, usually that's the instrument that we use to deliver the tokens. I mean, the contract could be immediate. It could certainly be something that, hey, we're going to deliver it. Maybe if the tokens are already developed and ready to go, then those tokens could be immediately issued pursuant to the contract. In most cases, a cryptocurrency issuer or a token issuer they're going to be using part of the proceeds from the offering to deliver tokens in the future. Okay, so that's the instrument, because maybe the token issuer needs to develop the tokens, and it's using that capital. It's developing the platform, it's developing the different aspects of the token, and then it's going to deliver that at some point in the future, right? And so And that's all governed again through this investment contract, right? And that's why the SEC has made, in the vast majority of cases, the SEC has said, hey, look, the investors, why are the investors buying these tokens? They're expecting for the value of those tokens to go up in the future, okay? And so when we apply the Howey test, what does the Howey test say? Well, an investment contract is any investment in an enterprise where the investor is relying upon the efforts of others, the management team, the company, the token issuer in this case. They're relying upon the efforts of other people to generate profits, right? The whole idea behind it, why do you invest in cryptocurrency in the first place, or a token? You expect that value of that token. If I'm buying a Bitcoin today, I hope that the Bitcoin is going to be worth more in the future, that I could sell it, right? Or at least hold its value, right? Now, the SEC has specifically come out and said, hey, based on the nature of the token itself, Bitcoin and Bitcoin specifically, they've said, hey, we don't believe that in other words, Bitcoin, the developer of Bitcoin, the whole history of it was not really generated to generate profits. It was just a tool, like a medium of exchange. I like to use the analogy of like a car wash token, right? A car wash token, when I buy it, I don't really expect. It's not really considered a security. Why? It's more of an asset. It's more of like a commodity, right? Where I can use that token to wash my car in the future at any time that I so choose, right? That's really the only utility that token has. It's likely not going to increase in value. I guess it could. It could increase in value if you were, let's say you were selling it at a discount, but the investor, like, hey, you buy, usually these car wash tokens are $1 a piece, but if you buy 4 now, we'll give you a 5th one free, right? Again, the investor's not really expecting the value of those tokens to go up. In other words, I'm not expecting the value of that token to go up to $2 or $3, right? In the future. Now, of course, inflation could come into play, but that's besides the point. Now, how would a car wash token be a security, right? Let's say. So in my example, a car wash token is not a security because it's more of a utility token. You're using it to wash your car. You're really not investing in it with the idea that you're going to sell it for double or triple down the road, right? Unless for some crazy reason there's all the car washes in town went out of business or something, and so then the value of that token may go up. But that's not the whole idea. Now, how would a car wash token be a security, right? And this is directly applicable. I don't expect a lot of you listening to this to be doing car washes, but it's directly applicable to cryptocurrency. It's why is a token that's a cryptocurrency or an emerging like new big blockchain powered token why is it considered a security? Well, if for example I had a car wash token but the car wash did not exist yet, right? I created all these tokens for car washes, and hey, I'm going to start selling these car wash tokens to investors. Hey, buy these car wash tokens. Can the investor use it today? Well, no, they can't use it today. The promoter, whoever's selling the tokens, the token issuer, they are issuing they're using the proceeds from pre-selling these tokens to go build the car wash itself, right? And in that case, if the investor is expecting, in that case, maybe I'm selling these tokens at a discount. Because why? I probably would have to, because the investor can't go use it today because the car wash doesn't exist today. They're not freely exchangeable for other. The token is specific to this particular future car wash that doesn't exist yet, right? And so in most cases, they say, hey, look, this car wash token is worth, one car wash, which is, let's say it's worth $5, right? I'm selling it to you today for $1, and in the future, maybe it's going to be worth, it's going to be the full value, right? And so applying the Howey test to that, it would clearly be, look, I'm buying this token. So the investor is getting it at a discount today, and they're buying that token for $1, and in the future it's going to be worth $5. So once the car wash is built, they could resell that token for $5, make a 5-to-1 return on their money, right? Now, in that scenario, yes, it hits all the factors of a Howey test. The investors are not building the car wash, the promoter is. And if the car wash never gets built, these investors don't know how to, build and operate a car wash. They're wholly dependent upon the promoter, right? So anyway, so in that context, the token would be considered a security. Securities laws apply. The investor could go ahead and do it, or the promoter could go ahead and do it, but they would need to provide full disclosure and file for their necessary exemptions and all of that, right? So all that would have to be in play, right? So, there are certain situations where, and the SEC has come out with a no action letter recently in the JET case. Where they determined that this particular token, because of the nature of the token itself, it was purely a utility token, there was no expectation of future profits. The investor was buying the token with the expectation to actually use the token themselves, right? And under that, kind of like a car wash token, the investor, the SEC came out and said, hey, look, under that kind of limited scenario, this is more of a utility token, not like an investment. And so we would, the SEC said, look, we would not take action against the issuer of these tokens because, the nature of the token itself the Howey test really doesn't apply. There is no expectation of future profits. You're just buying the token to use the token themselves, right? So under limited circumstances, you could say, hey, look, this particular token. It's a very, very narrow exception. You'd have to, if any of you want to get a copy of the no action letter, we're happy to send it to you. But under that particular scenario, the token is not considered a security, right? So, so we've talked about investment context generally. We've talked about tokens. We've talked about SAFs and safes, right? Which I'll try to update this outline to put those in there. But we have special purpose entities. Special purpose entities are it's a specific entity set up for a specific purpose. Let me give you some examples of those. We had a client in California that was a pharmaceutical company, and they did not want to give up ownership of their they needed to raise capital to invest in to develop one particular drug, right? And so they wanted to give the investors the opportunity to invest just in that particular drug itself, in the patents associated with with that particular drug, and they didn't want to raise capital in the company as a whole, right? So the company, so what they did is they set up a wholly owned subsidiary, and then they assigned the intellectual property rights associated with that drug, just that one particular drug only, to this new LLC, and then the investors had an opportunity to invest in that particular LLC. Okay, now that's what we would call a special purpose vehicle, SPV, or an SPE, special purpose entity. And in that particular context, so the investors, all they had ownership of was they could have set it up as an investment contract, saying, hey, look, any kind of profits we generate off this one particular drug, we're going to split the profits 50-50, or 70-30, or however it was needed, right? Could have done it through an investment contract, but they chose to do it through an entity, because they did want to pass some of the tax write-offs or the tax deductions associated with an LLC or partnership accounting on through to the investors, number one. And number two, again, investors they tend to like ownership. I mean, investment contract is what it is, but ownership in a particular entity that in turn owns a particular asset, I mean, that seems to certainly has a lot more substance to it. And also what they did is we made the LLC interest in that LLC convertible to stock in the mothership company, or it was convertible to stock in the mothership company at like a 1-to-1 exchange ratio, right? So in other words, if only under certain circumstances, like if the mothership company, the parent company, I should say, mothership is sort of the parent company is probably more commonly used, but I say mothership. But the investment in the subsidiary that owned that particular asset, if the parent company went public in the future, then the shares, or the LLC interest in the SPE entity would convert over into common equity, common stock in the parent company, right? And so that was really a great option, because that enabled them to, the investors invested in that particular drug. They didn't have ownership interest or exposure to everything else the company was doing. They're just investing in that particular drug. And then, they did have some upside in the event that the company went public, right? So they had some upside there. But if let's say Merck or Pfizer comes along and says, hey, we want to buy that drug, then instead of they would just say, hey, look, oh well, this drug is owned by this LLC. We're gonna you can actually buy the LLC and take out all the investors, or the LLC could sell that asset to you, that drug, and then obviously distribute the profits to the investors, and then the purpose of the entity would be all done, and then the company would wind down that unit. The parent company moves on and does it again with some other drug, right? So that's an example of how those are used, and those are used all the time when it comes to, it could be done in real estate development, where you have, maybe there's the commercial aspects of the property, or maybe separate and apart from the residential part. You can certainly set up different entities to accommodate the investor, right? Let's see. What else we got? We're talking about crowdfunding and crowdsourcing. Yeah, I think it's important to make a distinction between crowdfunding, product crowdfunding and equity crowdfunding, right? We actually have some questions on this topic. What is it? Okay, so these are some questions. Oh, yeah, well, I'll cover these questions at the end, but maybe the investor, or yeah, maybe there is an aspect of crowdfunding when you're selling the they're not really investors, they're more like customers, right? They're like, hey, we're going to build this cool invention. This maybe it's like a what was the famous one? Probably it's been about 5-10 years ago now, but they did a huge crowdfunding on a cooler, right? It's a cooler for a picnic cooler, right? That would hey, we're to keep. It's kind of a cooler. I mean, a design of it had wheels and it had Wi-Fi connectivity. You could hook up it had a speaker built in and kind of a cool cooler, right? For a picnic. And I think they didn't have the cooler developed yet. They just had a prototype and they had some designs. And they said, hey, why don't you go ahead and buy, if you can buy where they're going to retail this cooler for like $300. And they're saying, hey, you could buy it today for $100 and then in the future we'll deliver it to you, right? Again, they weren't really investing for profit, right? They weren't investing with the expectation that, hey, we're going to, because the product didn't exist yet, right? And so in this case, this is what we call product crowdfunding, where they're not really investors, but they're customers. They're putting up the capital to help the entrepreneur develop the particular product, and then they turn around and they go build the product, and once the product's delivered, then they deliver the product to the customer, right? And so that's what we call just product crowdfunding, right? Does not involve securities. Now there could be aspects of the deal, depending on how it's structured, if some of the proceeds are not used to develop the product. In other words, if the investor or the customer, some of the proceeds actually go to building up the company itself, right? Then you could certainly stray over into equity crowdfunding, which obviously involves securities laws, right? So you really have to look and analyze where is the money going, what is it being used for, what are the risks involved, and all of that to determine whether there are whether the securities laws apply, right? Let's see. We've already talked about digital securities, blockchain. It's all one and the same. We're seeing a lot of assets being tracked through a digital blockchain platform, and so the same rules when we talk about investment contracts certainly apply when we talk about digital securities, hybrid securities here. Again, we've talked about hybrid securities already, where there's aspects of both. But yeah, that's what we're talking about here. Now, when it comes to, in all of this, you definitely need to make sure you have competent securities counsel, because again, we can see where sometimes it's, obviously when you're doing like, equity or debt or, it's clearly a security, right? When you talk about investment contracts, obviously that's a security. When you're talking about different sorts of deals, like we talk about tokens and any sort of investments like that, where it could get a little bit complex. Most of the time, if there's any kind of gray area, you definitely want to err on the side of caution and treat it as a security. Go ahead and provide the full disclosure, because what you don't want is to be caught on the wrong side of an issue and say, hey, I don't think these are securities, I think I'm special. And you're seeing that play out in the courts right now with Ripple and Binance and all the rest of it. It's like, oh, well, we don't think we're securities. Or, in these cases, and I put out some YouTube videos on some updates on these cases, but they've actually, some judges have come out and said, well, during this period of time, they were considered securities, but they're not considered securities anymore, right? And so sometimes I think a lot of times judges are kind of splitting the baby, so to speak, when it comes to trying to determine, and nobody comes away happy, right? It's like, well, at some point these were securities, and then at other points, they became not a security, and so. Anyway, we can talk a lot about those cases, but at the end of the day, you've got to really assess, hey, what's fair to the investor. We've got to provide full disclosure to the investor so they know what they're getting into, and also that also serves the purpose of protecting the issuer, the token issuer, or the investment contract issuer. In case that, the deal doesn't go well and somebody brings a securities fraud claim against you, you definitely want to make sure you're covered, right? And so that's really what the whole, you drafting up a PPM and doing all that is for, right? I want to get to some questions here on the that I've received from. Let's see. Okay, here we are. This question, are all cryptocurrency securities? I think we covered that. Except for, Bitcoin's not considered a security. The SEC has come out and said that. Ethereum, not a security, but the SEC has taken the position that all the rest of them are securities. Again, with limited exceptions, they have issued a few no action letters around some very narrow, specific cases, right? But you would definitely want to get a no action letter beforehand. So I want to do a crowdfunding for a new product I'm designing. What are my options? Again, you can go product crowdfunding, as long as you're not giving them some sort of future profits interest, or you're just saying, hey, we're gonna use your money, go develop this widget, and then we're gonna deliver the widget to you, right? It's kind of like a pre-sale, pre-order, Then you'd be in the equity, or you'd be in the you'd be in the product crowdfunding world, right? If it's anything other than that, then you'd be, you cross over into the equity crowdfunding world, and we can talk. We've talked about regulation crowdfunding, or different kind of exemptions from registration when it comes to that, right? So, I have an investor who wants to invest in my store, but they don't want their investment to go toward anything else related to my business. How would that work? Well, that'd be very similar to the the cannabis store space, where we talked about, you could set up an investment contract and write up an investment contract PPM that is just specific to that particular store and not anything else, right? So, hey, I'm going to own an interest in this, profits interest in this store, and nothing else, right? So that's how that would be designed. They wouldn't own anything else in other stores. They wouldn't own anything related to your intellectual property or anything else. They just own an interest in that particular store, right? Which, in some cases may be a very lucrative thing for the investor, right? You could think of a lot of stores that you see that are super successful, and maybe the entrepreneur, all they need is some help getting the store opened, and so maybe they negotiate some kind of sweetheart deal, that really is lucrative, right? So anyway, so yeah, those are some questions. I think we're about out of time, those are. If you have any other questions related to tokens or different kind of assets like these, outside the box sort of deals, we certainly can, handle. My law firm certainly can handle any of those type of issues or things. So feel free to reach out. We did want to, mention equity, Marquee Equity, which is currently one of our preferred investor capital sources. They've got over 30,000 investor contacts, institutional investors. And so if you want an introduction to them, please let us know. We'd be glad to set up an appointment and introduce you to them. Now, typically, they're wanting to see a deal already ready to go, fully baked, ready to go. And so it makes sense in a lot of cases to go ahead and get the investment, the PPM set up, and that way everything is ready to go. So when you do get that introduction and start talking to them, they've got something to run on to show their investors. They don't want to be just, talking about, hey, we saw this deal on the back of a napkin, and maybe it might be a real investment opportunity, maybe not. No, they want a fully baked PPM, and that way they know, hey, this guy is serious, or this person is serious to raise capital, and so we can take it from there to start making those introductions right away. And so let me know if you can send an email to forum@mangumlaw.net, and we'd be glad to make those introductions. So anyway, again, there'll be an outline posted as well that goes along with this session. And if you have any questions, of course, if we can help you in any way, feel free to reach out to my law firm, and we'd be glad to help you there. So anyway, thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next forum. Thank you.